up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty P here with another episode of Steelers Touchdown Under. We are looking at Myles Jack. A lot of people are going to be talking about Myles Jack being added to the practice squad, what he brings to the Steelers. I wanted to share a particular area that I'm interested in. That's pass coverage, because let's face it, with Cole Holcomb gone, with Kwon Alexander gone, both gone for the year, it's pass coverage that's actually what's potentially missing at the linebacker position, particularly Neal out with a rib injury as well. That's what they're missing. They've got the thumbprint of Elandon Roberts. Mark Robinson can do a bit of everything. Mykal Walker, we're seeing a little bit more of as well, and what he can do. They can move Herbig, TJ, and Highsmith into sort of tackling roles. Maybe there's even something they look at with Marcus Golden. There's different things they can do, obviously, to help stop that run, the defensive line, etc., etc. Even get away with playing through running backs two linebackers in Roberts and Mark Robb, and a bit of Neal coming down to the box. But Myles Jack brings something particular. He had a huge amount of tackles last year for the Steelers, just like Mykal Walker did for the Falcons. But I'm interested to see whether Myles Jack brings something in pass coverage that the other guys don't. So what we're going to do is I thought, let's compare him to Myles Jack. Let's see how he fits in comparison to Cole Holcomb, who's obviously out for the year. Kwon Alexander is obviously out for the year. Keanu Neal, who they could play in the box, even though he's a strong safety. Mykal Walker, who we talked about last week on the show. Thanks to everyone that checked that out. One of our best performing videos in a while. And of course, E-Rob as well, who's playing really well from a tackling perspective. And I think he's played pretty well from pass coverage. But let's look at it over the course of their career. E-Rob's played the most amount of games, followed by Kwon. Then Myles Jack ranks third. In terms of pass coverage, let's look at interceptions. Kwon has 9, Myles Jack has 3. That's equivalent to Holcomb and Mykal Walker. So nothing really crazy different there. If we look at pass defenses, that's about the same. Myles Jack 18. So you're not necessarily calling him a pass coverage linebacker, but certainly doing more than Mykal Walker and Elandon Roberts. And we know that would be more than Mark Robinson as well. Mark Robb, E-Rob, so many Robs. But if you go down into the advanced defense for the start through their career, and we're looking at StatHead, which is from Pro Football Reference, a special comparison tool they have. Overall targets, Myles Jack has had the most targets. He's been targeted the most times by quarterback throughout his career. So obviously he has allowed the most completion rates as well. But his completion percentage is middle of the pack. It's less than E-Rob, less than Mykal Walker, so you're starting to see the trend here. He's better in pass coverage than perhaps these two guys, and familiar with the Steelers offense. Steelers defense. And remember, Mike Tomlin did talk a lot this week about the challenges they had pre and post game. He talked about it in the matchup show they have on the Steelers YouTube channel, and he talked about it post game in terms of the communication, how they had to adjust to the Browns offense in the first half. You have to adjust all the time, every game, but the communication was a big problem. Myles Jack is used to that Steelers defense. That will help. But you see here, 75% completion percentage rate allowed. He has allowed the most yards on his career, but as I say, he's been targeted a whole 62, I think, at his times more than anyone else, which is like an extra almost 25 to 30%. Myles Jack has allowed the second highest quarterback rating, but when you're being targeted that much, that's pretty huge. Yards per completion is a little bit more middle of the pack. So that's a good thing. Like Myles Jack, if you're targeted the most, definitely when you target 30% more of the time, as long as you're not the worst in the touchdown category, which he happens to be in this case, but definitely the completion, yards per completion, that's pretty good. And remember, in terms of overall snaps, Myles Jack has played the most amount of snaps compared to all the guys that the Steelers have had in that linebacking core, playing the linebacker role so far this season. So when we're saying he's been targeted more, he's played way more. He's played much more of the defensive snaps, 72% of the defensive snaps in games that he's been available to him, that he's been available to play during his career. So that's pretty big. But let's look at last year, because a career is a long time. There's guys on this list that came into the league in 2020 in Mykal Walker. There's guys that came in the league in Kwon Alexander in 2015. Neal, Roberts, and Myles Jack all came in 16. But Neal's also played a lot more of safety than he has a linebacker. So let's focus on last year and the roles that they played, because that's going to give us a better indication on recent performance. Obviously, Myles Jack hasn't played at times this year. But we look at last year. Holcomb played 7 games. Myles Jack played 15. E-Rob played 17. So did Kwon, Neal, and Mykal Walker played 16. That's what the big touting is, all the tackles that he made last year in the 104, 105, whatever it was. And they get the Steelers still got him. I've heard a bit of the Khan artist vibes with that. But We go back down to that advanced defense. Completion percentage allowed last year. And Myles Jack, again, middle of the pack with 76.4%. He was targeted the most amount of times again. Didn't allow the most completions. Mykal Walker allowed the most completions on being targeted the second most amount of times. E-Rob's not really targeted by that because he plays more of that run stuffing defensive guy. If you look at overall yards, though, Myles Jack was the highest. That is what it is. But in fact, if you look at yards per completion, he goes way down that list. So that's pretty cool from that perspective. When you look at yards per target, so obviously not every target hits the money. He's middle of the pack there, but technically him and Mykal Walker are actually the same number, second lowest. Wasn't the worst from TDs allowed, and actually his quarterback rating wasn't the worst either. I remember when he was played a lot more than Devin Bush. He was that starting linebacker. He had to play a lot of downs. I'm not deeply worried about that. And as we're seeing, though, it's certainly he brings more to the table than Mykal Walker and Kwon Alexander. But equally, when you look at the defensive snaps he played over 692 snaps. He played the most amount of defensive snaps. Again, he was more of that, more of the key linebacker for the Steelers. He's going to face more pass coverage. He's going to be targeted more in that way. So, as I said, I'm not deeply worried about that. But at the same time, he does offer more than Mykal Walker and Kwon Alexander. And that's really important because the Steelers have got guys that can stop the run. They can scheme Mark Robb to stop that run. They can scheme guys to rush the quarterback as well. But it's the pass coverage that's an element that's missing. And it's really hard to go and get those guys after the trade deadline. If this is before the trade deadline and we'd have these 2 injuries 2 or 3 weeks earlier, I would have said they would have probably gone out and got another bigger safety. And then they could have let Keanu Neal just be pretty much, apart from clear passing downs, you would have him on clear passing downs. He comes in the box and on running downs, he moves back to the safety position, or when there's tight end mismatches. I said all season that having not another backup safety was a problem. It's manifesting itself now with the linebacker injuries. But I do believe the addition of Myles Jack will actually help improve the coverage linebacking play from the Steelers. And that is something they need, and allow Neal and Fit to slip back into that safety position, which is going to be particularly important down the stretch. Because let's face it, him and Mykal, when they're back and fit, are going to be playing a lot of snaps. So hopefully that gives you a quick different take on the addition of Myles Jack to the Steelers roster. Now, he is on the practice squad. I think they'll get him adjusted, see how fit he is. That's an easy way for them to do that before that. And if he's not, they'll cut him, they'll move on. But if not, they'll bring him back in, let him get used to it. He'll find his way back in the Steelers defense pretty quick. If he's not playing next week, I think we'll see him the week after. So I think that's a Titans game. But hey, if you like the show, hit that like button. If you're not a sub to us and you're loving our content, please hit the sub button. If it's the first time you found us and you like the content, hit that sub button too. You can always unsubscribe if you don't like it. But as always, go Steelers.